This is Lifestyle Magazine with your hosts, Dr. Charmaine Long, Obi DK, Lionel LaMountain, and Mike and Gail Tucker.
Joining our crew now is Dr. Andrew Blecher, who has worked with the Cleveland Browns and Cavaliers, as well as the U.S. National Gymnastic Championships and the Summer X Games. One issue plaguing sports in general is steroid use. Welcome to the crew. We appreciate you gentlemen joining us here.
Thank you.
Doctor, how prevalent is steroid use right now in sports?
Probably much more prevalent than we think. There's a lot of sports that we don't commonly associate with steroid use. For example, there were years ago where we didn't think it existed in baseball, and now we know different. I think there's other sports that really don't get a lot of media attention from this issue, such as golf and tennis, and sports we don't particularly think have a reason to have the use of performance-enhancing drugs, but they're there. So I think it's
even
much
in
more
golf
common.
as well.
Absolutely.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Do you think, Dr. Blecher, do you think the reason why PEDs are so prominent is because they're still not testing for growth hormone quite yet?
Well, that's one, but there are many out there. I think the testing policies that are in place are really not designed to catch people yet. They are at the Olympic level, but in our professional sports, they're not. They're designed to have the sports say that they're doing something about it, but they're really not designed to actually catch people.
What sports are more prevalent than others in terms of PEDs? As far as what would you say the sports that you say it's rampant in these particular sports?
Again, it's hard to know because I think it exists everywhere, and where there's media attention, it will seem like it's prevalent, such as in baseball at the moment or football in years past, but I think it's everywhere.
Can I ask this might be the absolute dumbest question ever asked on any show anywhere, but you think of people and their health. They smoke, they drink. Some states you're allowed to use what used to be illegal substances not too long ago. For the person sitting at home watching television who just likes to be entertained by sports, that person might say, who cares? Besides the competitive disadvantage, I mean, what's the big deal with performance-enhancing drugs besides it might give me a small chance at trying to come close to beating Obi at sprinting or something, I don't know.
That would be some kind of
That would be some kind of drug, yeah.
Well, I think there's a number of issues. I mean, certainly the ethical issue, the level playing field issue. Of course, the issue that I deal with mostly is the health issue. Athletes always think if something works, then more is better. All of these drugs have side effects, particularly when they're used in normal levels, but athletes will always use things at 10, 20, even 100 times normal levels. And we just don't know, what the effects are, both short-term and long-term, so it's dangerous.
Stephen A., you talk to a lot of athletes who have used. And I'm not asking for names, but why do they do it?
Follow the money. Always follow the money. Let's take, for example, some of these names that, and we don't have to mention the names, but when you look at Major League Baseball, for example, I'll mention one. Alex Rodriguez. He's suspended from the New York Yankees. Okay? It's going to end up costing him in excess of $40 million.
Wow.
But let's remember, he signed for 275 with bonuses that could propel it to 300.
Yeah.
I think he'll get over the $40 million.
He will squeeze by.
So again, it's not like unless you can retroactively go about the business of getting your money back because they misrepresented their position. The fact is, one would argue that it pays to cheat. In some instances, because that's an example of it. You look at professional football players. You don't want to sit there and label percentage-wise who's using what, but you look at a sport like that and you somewhat understand, well, I got to get through injuries. I've got to go out there on the field the next day. I've got to show myself to be healthy enough to do this despite the violence, despite the punishment to my body. So I'm trying to get through there. Why? So I can continue to play and I can continue to get paid. You look at tennis, you look at golf. Well, if somebody finds a way to get an edge, especially if they don't get caught, they still have an edge. Even if you do get caught, again, it's not like you go to them and say, well, you have to give us the money back. So sometimes the biggest deterrent to cheating is when you're going to be punished in a manner that's not only going to cost you the money that you were scheduled to earn, but if it will cost you the money you had already earned. But if you don't have that, if you don't have that deterrent, you don't have that impediment, then on far more situations than we would like, one would argue it's worth the risk.
You said it pays to cheat, but there are some athletes, take Derek Jeter, for instance. character and consistency. I mean, if you have those two things, you don't need the performance-enhancing drug side of things.
You don't need it, but at the same time, yes, he does have character. You're talking about one of the greatest guys in the world when it comes to that.
Yes.
But you're also talking to a guy that's going to be a future Hall of Famer. So really, if he were to do it, it would be, oh, I want to smack home runs because, you know, everybody loves the long ball and all of that stuff. But you look at a guy like Barry Bonds, for example. Well, let's think about the excerpts from Sports Illustrated or the book Game of Shadows, where it talked about Mark McGwire and Jose Canseco. Well, Barry Bonds was destined for the Hall of Fame. He just wasn't smacking as many home runs as Mark McGwire. So what does he do? He says, well, you know what? I want to smack some home runs. And then in pursuing all of that, all of a sudden he became a pariah because in his mind, he was doing something that had been going on in the sport for quite some time.
Everybody else is doing it.
That's funny because it's kind of a pride thing in that instance.
To some degree.
And yet it's self-destructive.
Yes, but again, is it self-destructive? It depends on what you're looking at. In our eyes, it's self-destructive.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody that doesn't mind being acerbic, that doesn't mind being a bit distant from public, you know, affection and things of that nature, it doesn't matter to you. And on top of it all, it's going to facilitate you getting paid. What's the worst that could happen to you? They'll tell you to go away, and you know people will consider you a pariah. Well, you didn't want to talk to them anyway. You just wanted your money.
Take your
so
money,
what
go
difference
home.
does it make?
I've had patients who have used performance-enhancing drugs or anabolic steroids, and with so many clear athletic benefits and potentially monetary benefits, what do you tell your patients or an athlete who is considering doing that or is already doing it?
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, you know, obviously from a medical perspective, I have to convince them not to do it, and that's very hard to do. I think the medical establishment lost a lot of credibility for many years denying that anabolic steroids work, when clearly they do. So I think you have to, you know, first admit that a lot of these performance-enhancing drugs actually do work, and once you've established that, I think then you have a little bit more reliability in what you're telling them, and you just have to come at it from, you know, I don't recommend that you do this, and if you're going to do it, we need to know what are the possible side effects, and there's a limit. You know, more is not necessarily better, more is potentially dangerous. But, you know, getting into the athlete's psyche and trying to turn them off of these things is very difficult. There was a anonymous survey several years ago of future Olympians, and they questioned, you know, if you had the ability to take a performance-enhancing drug and you were guaranteed you were not going to get caught and it would get you a gold medal, would you do it? And 80% of them said they absolutely would. 80%.
80%.
They then asked the question again and said, okay, you can take the performance-enhancing drug, you're going to win the gold medal, but you're also going to die from the side effects of this drug. Would you do it? And still, the majority of them still said yes.
That's incredible.
It is very difficult to turn them off from that. You know, athletes believe that they've already put so much into their sport in terms of time and training and everything else, and that needs to be validated. And whether that's validated with money or it's validated with a gold medal, you know, something needs to validate that. And if they have to do whatever they have to do to get that, they're going to do it.
Is the chemist still ahead of the people administering the drug testing? Because people are beating these tests.
Absolutely.
Especially in track and field. You know, I'm a former track guy, I love sprinting, compete against it my whole collegiate career. And I believe that there's still a lot of sprinters that are on the stuff and have incredible chemistry.
Absolutely. And the chemists are always going to be ahead. And I think the only way that you are able to work against that is what we're doing now, where you're able to save the samples for years. So, okay, we can't test for whatever you're taking now, but we're going to be able to figure out how to test for it 5, 10, 20 years from now, and we're going to hold on to your sample, and when we do test it and we do find it, we're going to take away your gold medal.
Is there a statute of limitations on it?
Well, there's a statute of limitations on how long we can go with this conversation. We're gonna have to end it up right now, and we take a break. When we come back, we're gonna talk about the number of concussions that are going on in sports. We're back with ESPN sports analyst Stephen A. Smith and sports medicine specialist Dr. Andrew Blecher. Dr. Blecher, there are over 300,000 sports-related concussions every year. What sport has the most of them?
That's a good question. Most definitely football. I would say in my clinic, I probably see 1 concussion a week for most of the year, and then during football season, about 6 a day.
6 a day?
So there's no question, football.
6 a day?
Oh my goodness.
That's incredible.
What are some of the symptoms that would basically lead to a concussion? That you have a concussion.
Yeah, there's a large variety of symptoms. Obviously, the brain controls many different functions, so anything that involves the brain, whether it's memory, concentration, focus, attention, blurry vision, ringing in your ears, nausea, vomiting, headache is the most common, but there's quite a large variety.
What's the most serious long-term side effect or disability from concussions that you see?
Well, hopefully, 95% of concussions resolve on their own pretty quickly. The ones that have the prolonged symptoms are usually the ones that have had multiple concussions. So a kid has had 5, 10, even 20 concussions, or have had 2 that are very close together and they don't get a chance to recover. And that's what leads to more of the long-term side effects. But the majority of concussions, they resolve.
So we're all familiar with Junior Seau and other former NFL players who have had suicide that has been linked to chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is and how it develops?
Sure. So we're not 100% sure about the connection yet that CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is directly connected to concussion. We think it's connected to the overall volume of head trauma. Obviously concussion is part of that, but there are so many subconcussive events. Every play in the line of scrimmage in football, there's head-to-head contact, and there's there's trauma that's occurring there, whether it shows up as symptoms or not. It's that overall volume that leads to it. So you have people who develop CTE, maybe they've never had a concussion or had 1 or 2, but they've had such an overall volume of the subclinical head trauma. So it's probably a combination of both, but it's overall head trauma that we believe leads to CTE.
Stephen A., are sports franchises getting more serious about this?
Well, they have no choice. I mean, when you consider the attention that's being paid to it by the NFL, everybody has to follow suit. You've got retired players, former players, even some current players, part of lawsuits against the National Football League. Initially, they had settled for about $765 million with former players, and then ultimately the courts got involved because some felt that wasn't enough, and now that's something that's being revisited. So you take all of those things into consideration. Again, I know it sounds cliche-ish or whatever, follow the money, because when you start talking about that amount of money that's potentially being doled out, all of a sudden it gets everybody's back up, gets all the antennas raised, and everybody recognizes that if you don't pay rapt attention to this issue, we're going to make you do so, because we're going to affect your wallet and your bottom line. And in America, if not the world at large, when you mess with people's bottom lines, they tend to stand up and take notice.
Dr. Blecher, we've got just a few seconds. If you had a son, would you want him to play football?
It's a good question. Hopefully he'd be a kicker.
Make a lot of money, kick the ball.
It's a great answer.
No trauma.
That's a great answer.
Football, kick the ball, huh?
That's a great answer.
Kick the ball. How about you, Stephen A.?
Me personally, I wouldn't want, if I had a son, I would not want him playing football. I mean, and not only that, baseball is safer, basketball is safer, and the dollars are bigger and more guaranteed.
That's right, more guaranteed. So if you're good in those sports, you're better off.
The money's guaranteed. I mean, these guys signed for $100 million, $200 million. They're getting paid every penny. You could sign a $50 to $100 million contract in the NFL. You get an injury, they can cut you, they can waive you, they can do a lot of different things to circumvent what they owe you.
And you lose a lot. Thank you, everyone, for your participation today. Appreciate it. We'll be back with a final word right after this. We've had a great conversation with Stephen A. Smith and Dr. Andrew Blecher. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you.
So, are our values really this messed up that we would, as a nation, permit this sort of thing going on, and the steroids and everything else?
Best way to answer that question is that it was messed up. It's getting better.
It's getting better.
It's getting better, and that's always a good thing.
It is a good thing.
A lot of the states are doing things now too, I think. Like California just passed a law in the high schools and what they can or can't do.
They're paying attenation, they're taking notice.
There's more awareness now, obviously, right?
Well, the main thing is, let's take care of our health, shall we?
Yes.
I want to thank all of you for being here, and thank you for being a part of this one as well. We look forward to seeing you again next time, but until then, you take care of yourself. Bye-bye.